Hi from New York City in pretty challenging times. The first story in my collection is called Touching the Elephant, and I'll read a section of that story, but I'll begin about 5 pages into it. After Jimmy was killed in Nam, maybe it was guilt that made Maura fall so completely out of love with Owen. At least she said that she no longer loved him. One night in late spring, 3 weeks after Jimmy's funeral, I awoke to the familiar sound of pebbles against my window. Owen and I sat on the edge of my bed facing an angry Malcolm X chastising a stone Janis Joplin. My bedroom was a tunnel of posters, civil rights and anti-war activists, pop artists, peace signs, and anti-war slogans. And my bookshelves housed left-leaning books and magazines, and pamphlets that Owen and I would never discuss. Watching the December 1st, 1969 televised draft lottery together was the only political act we ever shared. And when my number turned out to be low, lower numbers were called first for the draft, he shouted, "Holy shit!" Closest I ever heard him come to protesting the war. Owen leaned forward, his elbows on his knees and his fingers splayed against his forehead. "She hates me," he moaned. I didn't respond, I just listened. "Really hates me," he continued. "I'm not kidding. She said if I bother her anymore, she'll report me for stalking her, even call the police." "She wouldn't do that," I said, but I knew that she would. He looked at me as if to say, "We're talking about the same Maura, right?" He continued to grumble about Maura as train lights from the owl outside my window strobed my room, to the staccato of steel screeching against steel, a climatic stop, then recommencing, fading, vanishing. I don't remember how long Owen talked or everything that he said, but at some point I agreed to drive with him back to Vermont and help him pack his things. With just a couple of weeks left in his junior year, he insisted that he was done with college. No point in my trying to convince him otherwise, and who was I to lecture him, having spent my freshman year mixing up day with night, playing cards, smoking pot, and plunging into a funk I had yet to climb out of. Eventually, he undressed down to his skivvies. We slipped under the covers in my twin bed, and he continued talking until we fell asleep. Sometime later, I awoke to the bed shaking. Crouched at the foot of the bed, Owen sounded muffled, as if he were under a pile of debris. "Gonna jump, gonna jump." I tried getting him to lie down without waking him, but his eyes shot open, wide and fearful. He was soaked with sweat. "You must have been having a nightmare," I said, and sat next to him. He collapsed onto my lap and sobbed. He had dreamed he was jumping from a burning helicopter. "Jimmy didn't make it," he cried. Owen, burning and sweaty, inched up from my lap and slid against my bare chest. He was hard, and immediately my body responded. I heard the call of another train. Again, lights strobed my room. Like the jumpy frames in a silent movie, Owen appeared, then vanished, then reappeared, until the train passed, and then in its wake, we lay tangled and smelling of sex. Except for the sound of our hearts and breaths, we lay silent. I felt more alive than I had ever felt, but I feared that Owen might think this had been a terrible mistake, and he'd be even more depressed than he was. I whispered, "Owen, are you?" But before I could finish asking if he was okay, he pressed his fingers against my lips. Eventually, I fell asleep. The next morning, I asked him if he still wanted me to drive back to college with him, and he acted surprised by my question. "Of course," he said. "Why wouldn't I?" I didn't answer. Driving up Route 7 through Vermont, I spotted patches of snow lingering below evergreens, despite it being the last week in April. Detour signs warned of washed-out roads. We talked about Maura, about Owen leaving school, about his parents' probable reactions, about us traveling, about him joining the reserves, about my 4F status because of hypertension, which had been a surprise to me. Owen did most of the talking, but I also contributed. Neither of us mentioned Owen's dream or what had happened between us afterwards. Once we arrived, I helped Owen pack, stuffing his dirty clothes into plastic bags, stripping a few posters from the walls, boxing books. He didn't have any records, just a radio. Then we loaded up his Volkswagen Beetle. I visited with the black dress I had last seen her in and holding the folded tri-cornered American flag. "How are you?" I asked. "Don't be ridiculous," she answered. She already knew that Owen was leaving. It was a small college, and lately news about him had traveled fast. His behavior, what Maura called his nuttiness, drew a lot of attention. If he hadn't left college of his own volition, she believed that he would have been forced to leave. Students had noticed him staring, zombie. Embarrassed might change his behavior. Maura had screamed at him to stop stalking her in front of the other students. I hadn't realized that things had gotten so bad. "Are you afraid of him?" I asked. "No, but it's time for him to grow up. What's done is done." Maura closed her book, and we wandered through Vale Manor's rambling hodgepodge of interconnected buildings, several living quarters, barns, and a carriage house. Once the rural home of Theodore Vale, the founder of the Bell system. What it lacked in symmetry, it made up for in aesthetics. Leaded mullin windows, built-in window seats and bookcases, balcony ceilings. The horse stalls in the carriage house had intricate ironwork, and the huge barn, though drafty, made for a great theater. In contrast, the recently built buildings, utilitarian dorms, cafeterias, library, and gym, brought a gulag to mind, especially in the harsh Vermont winters. In 1973, the same year Maura would die, Vale Manor would also be demolished. Administrators and board members feared it was a fire trap. On the balcony surrounding the grandest of several parlors, we found a quiet place to sit, and through the balusters I glared at the two huge chairs next to the stone fireplace, the original furniture left in the manor. Rumor had it that Theodore Vale had the chairs custom made in preparation for a visit from President William Harding Taft, each man weighing more than 300 pounds. On many cold winter nights, Maura, Owen, and I nestled into one of the chairs. Owen and I pressed close together, and Maura curled onto our laps. We discussed everything and nothing, warmed by a roaring fire, and often fell asleep, later waking to a few embers remaining in the fireplace, while outside the hint of sunrise turned the sky pink and the snow lavender. I sat with my legs crisscrossed, and Maura rested her head in my lap. I thought of what had happened the night before with Owen, but I didn't mention it. In fact, we no longer spoke of Owen or of Jimmy or of anything that had been, but was no more. She updated me on silly campus gossip. I told her that what I had been doing in New York City, but we were mostly quiet, and I stroked her hair as if she were a small child needing sleep. I'll always remember our walk back to the dorm. Maura's arm through mine, her occasional sighs, and the infinity of stars against the velvety black Vermont sky. I told Maura that I loved her. "I know," she said. "I love you too, Pops." A hug, then a kiss, and somehow I knew it would be the last time that I'd see her. After driving back to New York City through the night, I stepped out of Owen's Volkswagen in front of my grandparents' shop. Rush hour passengers climbed the metal steps to the L. A train passed overhead, and Owen had to repeat several times before I could hear him, "I think I'll just drive back home. I have a lot to explain to my folks." I assumed it would also be the last time that I'd see him. "What's done is done," I heard Morris say. But I was wrong. Please be well and stay safe. Thank you.